The description is interesting because it's 3 feet long, and it's about 3 inches wide. It's a pretty big sword. It's made of iron and has a bronze haft with a wooden grip. Even the tip of the sword remains intact. The strata from which the sword was excavated dates to the late 7th century, or about 620 BC. Most swords from the Middle East, as portrayed in pictures and reliefs, these were more short weapons, and they seem to have been used like daggers. This, however, was a 3-foot sword from Vered Jericho, and seems to be unique in its large size. Because men at that time averaged about 5 feet, a 3-foot sword would have been very big indeed. It may, however, represent a more accurate view of Laban's sword. So that's interesting that there are archaeological materials dealing with swords in the day of Lehi and Nephi. And then Nephi continues, 1 Nephi 4:11 through 13. And the Spirit said unto me, Behold, the Lord hath delivered him into thy hands. Yea, and I also knew that he had sought to take away mine own life. Yea, and that he would not hearken unto the commandments of the Lord. And he had also taken away our property. And it came to pass that the Spirit again said to me, Slay him, for the Lord hath delivered him into thy hands. Behold, the Lord slayeth the wicked to bring forth his righteous purposes. It is better that one man should perish than that a nation should dwindle and perish in unbelief. Now, the Spirit responds to Nephi's hesitation with reasons that, from Nephi's perspective, are acceptable. We have to grasp this situation. This is a serious problem that Nephi is now facing here. It's pretty dramatic when you think about it. Most important is the reminder that Yahweh himself had slain the wicked to protect his people. Now, whether this statement is a direct recollection of Nephi's statement about Pharaoh, or whether Nephi's understood it is more bodily, he clearly understood that Yahweh himself had sometimes killed but had not murdered. There is a difference in the ancient law. So, the injunction that one man should perish to preserve the many, this has been actually studied by John W. Welch and Heidi Harkness Parker, based on certain biblical law. They say 2 Samuel 20 is a pivotal example. King David sought the life of Sheba, a rebel guilty of treason. When Sheba took refuge in the city of Abel Joab, the leader of David's army demanded that Sheba be released to him. The people of Abel beheaded Sheba instead, and therefore Joab retreated. This episode became an important legal precedent justifying the killing of one person in order to preserve an entire group. Another Old Testament case, preserved more fully in the Jewish oral tradition, involved Jehoiakim, the king of Judah who rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar went to Antioch and demanded that the great Jewish council surrender Jehoiakim or the nation would be destroyed. Jehoiakim protested. Here's his comment. He says, Do they set aside one life in favor of another? But listen to what the council said. They were completely unmoved by Jehoiakim's words. They said, Did not your forefather do exactly that to Sheba ben Bichri? Jehoiakim was then released to Nebuchadnezzar, who took him to Babylon. And you can read about that in 2 Chronicles 36:6. So Jehoiakim, where presumably he was executed in Babylon, and because, after Jehoiakim, of course, because Zedekiah became the next king, less than 4 months later, at the time of the Book of Mormon account begins, Nephi was probably keenly aware of how the one for many principle was used to justify Jehoiakim's death. So this is interesting that this principle, this precedent, this legal precedent from the biblical record is being utilized in Nephi and Laban. It's kind of interesting there, isn't it? And then Nephi continues in chapter 4, verses 14 through 18. He says, And now when I, Nephi, had heard these words, I remembered the words of the Lord which he spake unto me in the wilderness, saying that inasmuch as thy seed shall keep my commandments, they shall prosper in the land. Yea, And see, all this time he's holding this sword, and the Spirit is saying, will you slay this guy? The Lord has delivered him to you. So Nephi's mind is racing wildly, thinking about all the reasons. It is so interesting. He says, and yea, I also thought that they could not keep the commandments of the Lord according to the law of Moses, save that they should have that law of Moses. And I also knew that the law was engraven upon the plates of brass that Laban had. And again, I knew that the Lord had delivered Laban into my hands for this cause, that I might obtain the records according to his commandments, the Lord's commandments. Therefore I did obey the voice of the Spirit, and I took Laban by the hair of the head, and I smote off his head with his own sword. Now, Nephi, and I'm on page 118 and 119 in Brandt's first volume of the Second Witness. Brandt says, Nephi positions his family as Israel during the Exodus from Egypt, reprising the theme he first brought up in the earlier in the chapter in verse 2, in 1 Nephi 4:2. So they are traveling according to Yahweh's direction. And so, logically, they will require his law and in their new life and their location. So they need the commandments and law of Yahweh. Nephi needs a powerful reason to overcome his reluctance to shed blood. That reason is his people's future ability to know the commandments. And because those commandments are contained on the brass plates, they are therefore necessary to Lehi's posterity. Laban wasn't a righteous man anyway. He wasn't worthy to have those records, as far as that goes, even though historically and archaeologically and culturally the military governors of several of the large cities were the retainers of the records. Now, Fred Essig and H. Daniel Fuller have written a lengthy essay called Nephi's Slaying of Laban, A Legal Perspective, an exhaustive analysis of relevant Hebrew law during Nephi's time. They cast it as a brief assessing Nephi's defense strategy. This is so interesting. I'm going to use Brandt's summation here. I have that article, but I'm not going to go into it because I've got so much else to share with you. This is going to be way too long anyway, but it's necessary and important. Isn't it amazing how much information we can understand and assess from the ancient Near East, whether it's legal, historical, religious, cultural, whatever, once we start reading between the lines in the Book of Mormon? It's packed with information. We can unfold it and unfold it and unfold it and continue to unfold it and learn something new every time we do this. That's the power of the Book of Mormon, in my opinion. So, anyway, first they propose that laws governing burglary and theft, Laban is in unlawful possession of the plates, might justify Nephi's actions, but find both of these explanations unsatisfactory. That's not a good defense. Well, Nephi's home had not been burglarized. While Laban stole their wealth, the punishment for theft was a fine, not the death penalty. So the authors quote Exodus 21:12 and 13, which might apply to Nephi. Here's what they say. He that smiteth a man so that he die, shall be surely put to death. And if a man lie not in wait, but God deliver him into his hand, then I will appoint thee a place whither he shall flee. And here's what Essig and Fuller then say. They say, the attitude of the rabbis on the involvement of God in Exodus 21:13 differs in some respects. Their comments are found in an Amoraic utterance that was preserved by Simeon ben Lachish. The rabbi's thoughts are developed through a discourse that associates Exodus 21:13 with 1 Samuel 24:13. The teaching is simple. God is absolutely just. And we know that. That's the given. So he will deliver over to an unwitting homicide, a killer, only a man deserving death. In other words, the man killed will be say, a murderer who, owing to lack of witnesses, escaped his proper punishment. So this case apparently fits Laban, who was both condemned and executed through the intervention of God.